For today's session, as was requested by most of the participants in the initial poll, we are planning to introduce the Remap tool, which is a tool that was introduced by IRENA. And we are honored here to have colleagues from IRENA who are joining us to present this tool. It's principally a renewable energy scenario planning tool, but also have the capabilities for greenhouse gas inventory for projections and modeling. And today we are going to focus on that capability of the tool so that for those countries who are interested, they could consider use of this tool. There are also already in this region in Belize for the NDC that was revised very recently. The energy sector baseline scenario and mitigation scenarios were done using this tool by a colleague from IRENA. And to get started, I will remind you some of the housekeeping. So the meeting will be till 11 o'clock AST, the East Caribbean time. We request that all of you to keep your microphones muted and the videos off. So what we are going to do is actually, if you have any questions, you could raise it in the chat. But while all the presenters have completed their presentations, we have a Q&A session. So during that session, whoever has any questions could raise their hands and ask questions, as well as we take on the questions that are put on the chat during that time. If you have any technical challenges, please contact info@mrrehab.org. We have Quincy and Ayana and the team from the Remark Rehab Secretariat who's there to ready to assist you. So to introduce you to this, the presenters today, we have Ricardo Borini from the Remap team leader, Rodrigo Leme, Maria Vicente Garcia, and Chris Lee Guerra, who will be presenting in that particular order. So we're going to look at the capabilities of Remap tool for modeling and projection of greenhouse gas inventory scenarios, as well as the energy sector mitigation scenarios. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ricardo to take on, and please continue handing over to the next colleague as you complete. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you all can hear me. I would like to really start thanking all of you to be here to participate in this hopefully very nice and interesting discussions we'll have. Thank you for all the team to also be here, all of us here to discuss with you in detail what are the possibilities and the capabilities of this tool. So we're really happy to be able to present that, as we have been working hard, and this is, as we understand, a very easy tool to deal with all these energy projections, not just the power sector, but all end-use sectors, so transport, industry, building. So we are trying our best to make it easy to all of us to work with this tool and to have the indicators that can help us, setting targets, specifying policies or specific, I would say, actions that are needed. So it's a comprehensive approach, and hope you all enjoy that. We will have a step-by-step presentation followed by Q&A, and so feel free to ask and to send, as you know, in the chat questions, so we can kind of customize your ideas and your I would say a curiosity on this tool. So please really let's try to be as interactive as possible. Thank you again, Ventura, for the opportunity. And having said that, I will ask now Rodrigo to start the presentation. So thank you all, and Rodrigo, the floor is yours. You're mute, Rodrigo.
Okay. I hope you can all hear me, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Vitura. Thank you, Ricardo, for the introduction. So let's start here. I will be in the first part of the presentation giving a general overview of the tool or of the toolkit, if you will. And then more towards the end, Maria and Chrisley will delve a little bit deeper into some case studies on how the tool can be applied, specifically for the NDC support that we've been doing in IRENA. So the Remap, we're calling it the Remark Toolkit because it is sort of many different files that we've been using to do our energy analysis. So it's basically a software application currently fully implemented in Excel that we have developed in-house. Myself, Maria, Chrisley, Ricardo, and others in the Remap team have been developing this for the past 3 or so years, and that we use in IRENA to develop our energy scenarios. Obviously, the focus of our analysis is always to try and understand how much more renewable energy, how much more energy efficiency can we implement and deploy in the country energy systems, right? Normally, the focus of our analysis is country-based, but we also do regional level analysis using this toolkit. And in fact, at the moment, we are doing Central America analysis for 7 Central American countries using this toolkit that we will be talking about today. It's Ventura introduced in the introduction. Ventura explained this. So it's primarily an energy modeling tool. So the main focus is energy modeling, but obviously, as you might be aware, it's very easy to move from energy numbers to emissions, from energy numbers to emissions numbers using the standard emission factors for CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And so the tool, in fact, can also be used to make forecasts and explore scenarios of greenhouse gas emissions in the energy sector. So that's important to say, this is an energy sector tool. It does not include land use emissions or to some extent industrial process emissions, but certainly not land use emissions. Some of the elements that are in this tool are, and I think that the main strength of the tool is the end use sector analysis. So a strong focus on demand forecast and scenarios, energy and emissions, like I said. We have also another module that looks into costs, so a little bit the economics of these scenarios, costs, investments, fuel expenditures, and so on. And outside of the tool, we also incorporate the power system analysis. Power system analysis, as I will explain later, is not done inside of this tool. We normally rely on other tools that I will be talking about more later. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So like I mentioned before, we use the tool in IRENA. This is the main tool in IRENA to develop our long-term energy scenarios. Back many years ago, the main objective was to understand, I remember this 4 or 5 years ago, the main objective was how to double renewable energy in countries. But now clearly from some years and today, the main focus is to produce net zero scenarios. But we have the capability in the tool, as you can see in the bottom of this slide, to work with different scenarios. So normally we work with 4 different scenarios. So we have a baseline scenario, which is, so to speak, together with the planned energy scenario, the starting point of the analysis. So these are the scenarios that the baseline is one scenario that you might say, you just extrapolate what is there in the country at the moment, you extrapolate that in the future, and that gives you a sort of an envelope of of what might happen in the energy system. Then we have the planned energy scenario, which is one that reflects the existing policies and regulations and plans that are in the country that might or might not be implemented, but at least they are agreed about on. And the other two scenarios are, so to speak, IRENA scenarios. Those are the transforming energy scenario and the decarbonization scenario. So the transforming energy scenario is one that focuses on more ambition, but still very ground-based in terms of the specific conditions of each country. And then we have the decarbonization scenario, which is one that focuses on net zero scenarios. So the focus there is clearly to eliminate net emissions of greenhouse gases. Before I move to the next, so one important thing is, and one strength of this process is that we always like to do it with very, very close cooperation with countries. In fact, without that, it's very difficult to develop these analyses. So the tool itself is just, I would say, a shell, a sort of a framework that helps to guide us in the analysis, but it's truly the interaction with countries and exploring possibilities and understanding the reality in each country, collecting data with experts in the country. That's what really makes the difference in any study that we do using this tool. So yeah, please, next. Yeah, the tool, so now moving a little bit in terms of how the tool is organized. It has a rather granular modeling of the energy sector. And you might know other tools that are more top-down, sort of focus on start from macroeconomic indicators and then try to figure out what the energy system will do given macroeconomic trends. We do something different. This tool is a bottom-up analysis. We start with different sectors, subsectors, and energy services to estimate energy demand. So, and I will show in the next slides a little bit more of detail on that. And we feel that this approach allows us to take much better informed decisions on the future technology mix, especially in the energy system. And also to more properly account energy efficiency, which is normally quite difficult to do, especially if you're doing top-down analysis. And like I mentioned, because now the focus is so much energy transition and net zero scenarios, and because this transformation, the energy transition, really means sometimes profound changes in the energy system, it's very important to be able to go to the detail and to the granular level and understand how changes there at the technology level affect the overall system. Whereas if you're working with top-down analysis, it's more difficult to do those structural changes. And I mentioned already before, we always prefer to work with countries. And in fact, the first step that we take when applying the toolkit is to figure out what the reference case is. I mentioned before, that would be the planned energy scenario. And from this reference case or the planned energy scenario, we move to the other scenarios. Next slide, please. So how do we see this toolkit supporting countries in their energy transition? And this is something that we started maybe 1-2 years ago, providing support to countries in definition of their NDCs. We really hope to add value to the process by being able to really identify what are the data gaps and the information gaps, and the granular nature of this tool really allows us to do that. Because one of the main steps and the most time-consuming steps in applying this toolkit is really data collection, and it's there you realize what is missing, and I think that adds a lot of value to the process. Because in the end, it's really access to data and being able to analyze the data that gives you really solid and basis to determine targets in the energy in general related to the energy system. So we hope that the tool really helps to define targets and strategies so that we have really proper backup of what is needed in each sector, subsector, we'll see later, with proper indicators, and also proposing a framework for monitoring those indicators. And in the end, this all will provide insights on how to better define policies and regulations that are needed to implement the targets. Next slide, please. Just to give you an example of the sort of calculations and the level of detail that is involved in this tool, like I mentioned, we approach the energy modeling from the activity level in different sectors, subsectors, and energy services. Right? So I included there 3 examples. For instance, if we're trying to understand the energy consumption of electric appliances in households, so things like TVs, refrigerators, and air dryers. So we start with the number of households, and then we're trying to understand what is the penetration rate of each appliance in the households, understand how many units of each appliance there is in the household, which types of units are there more or less efficient, and also the capacity of these units and the numbers of hours of use. So using that level of granular information, we come up with the energy consumption. Same thing, for instance, for lighting, where we start with floor area, then understand penetration rates, demand for lighting service is measuring the lumen per square, and so on. So these are just to give an example. Another one in transport sector for road passenger transport. We try always to start with the vehicle fleet, so the number of cars of each type that are in the country, the average distance traveled by vehicles, and the specific fuel consumption of the vehicles, and the types of fuels that are used. So you can see there's a lot of input data that is needed, and that, as I mentioned before, is the most time-consuming part of the analysis, but then that also gives you a very solid ground on which to develop indicators and propose targets. Next slide, please. So in terms of sectors and subsectors, you can see there on the demand side, we deal with 3 main sectors: buildings, transport, and industry. In buildings, we have residential and commercial buildings. For transport, we look at both passenger and freight transport, and then subdivide those into road, rail, air, and maritime transport. And for industry, we have 2 options. Industry is always a little bit trickier because sometimes there is a dearth of information. But we can look at industry from a more macro level, looking at industry GDP, but we can also go down into subsectors of industry, things like cement, iron and steel, aluminium, chemicals, and so on. And other industry that might be more relevant to the country that we are analyzing. Next slide, please. Yeah. So a little more detail on the building sector. I mentioned we subdivide buildings into residential and commercial. And then we further subdivide each of those into 5 different energy services, as we call it. So we look at space heating and cooling. We look at water heating, lighting, appliances, hand cooking. And so there you see the level of granularity that we're using in this tool. And obviously each of these energy services is then further broken down in different technologies, right? For cooking, for instance, different types of cooking stoves, or different types of light bulbs for lighting, and so on. And next slide, please. So for transport, we have both passenger transport and freight transport. And like I mentioned, we subdivide those into road, rail, air, and water, or maritime transport could be rivers as well, obviously. And some of the input data that is needed, things like vehicle fleet, the distance traveled, occupancy rates of vehicles, so the number of passengers per vehicles in the case of passenger transport, or the tonnage, the number of tons per vehicle in the case of freight transport, the efficiency of the vehicles, the energy consumption by kilometer, and so on. And with all that, applying those types of equations that I showed before, then we estimate energy demand by carrier, by fuel type, in all of these sectors and subsectors and energy services. Next slide, please. I mentioned briefly before for industry, so we can always start with a more aggregate view of industry, looking at industry GDP, and to the extent that there is information available for subsectors of industry, we can also go deeper into those subsectors and make a specific analysis there. Obviously, then, if we're looking at subsectors, they are aggregated, and maybe the rest of industry, of other industries, done using GDP. There, we need to have some more flexibility. It's always a little more challenging to work with industry. But the types of information that we need is things like, if we're talking about specific subsectors, we would need, say, in cement production, we would need tons of cement produced every year. The production modes, if you're doing dry and kiln or wet kiln, or of the sector, so we can build the energy balance for that sector. Next, please. So there was the demand side. Obviously, once we figure out what the demand for energy is, the next step is to understand how we're going to supply that demand for energy. And so we also have in the toolkit the supply side analysis. The most important one tends to be power sector. That is what people are most interested in. In this case, we rely on external tools to do the analysis. So we do not do any type of power expansion or capacity expansion optimization using the Remark Toolkit. So, for instance, in the case of Central America, we decided to use the message model. But there are other options out there that can also be used. And then there has to be some sort of soft link between these two analyses that would be done independently somehow. There are other transformation sector that is also relevant that we have in the tool. But very often we have to add new modules depending on the country that we are analyzing. At the moment, we have some capabilities on bioenergy, hydrogen, district heating. This is covered relatively well in the toolkit. But in some countries, say, there might be a specific interest in some type of biofuel that we're not covering. So then we would have to work out how to address that specific need. And that's what we normally do. So the toolkit in the end is a work in progress, right? There's always something that we have to incorporate. And we are happy to do that, to serve the best interest of the country that we're working with. Next slide, please. Yeah, so it's still, yeah, you can maybe just go to the end of this one. Yeah, I think, good, yeah. So this is about the power sector, and this is a very interesting development. This is called the IRENA's FlexTool. This tool was not developed by the Remap team, so none of us here today is an expert on this tool. I have another group of colleagues working with us in ITC Bonn that developed this tool with the help of the VTT is a research institute, if I'm not mistaken, in Finland. And the focus of this FlexTool, as the name suggests, is to assess the flexibility of power systems. So what we've been doing now is, as we develop the power system analysis using, for instance, message, then we share our results with our colleagues that run the FlexTool, so that they can now assess the flexibility of the power system that we are proposing in our scenario. This is something quite new. I think not many people are doing this, and as you're aware, it's a very key analysis when we're talking about the energy transition. So, very happy that we have the possibility of offering this analysis, you know, in the overall approach of the different tool that is not fully linked with the Remark Toolkit. So there is some soft linking and some manual work that needs to be done there, but it's been working very well, and hopefully in the near future we will connect these two tools so they can be operated together. I won't go too much into the details of this slide because I'm not an expert on this, but it's important to say that this, like the IRENA, the Remark Toolkit, the FlexTool is also free, it's publicly available, and it's open source. So they actually have a website that I would recommend. You can, the link is there in the slide. You can visit, you can download the tool there and learn more about it. And I'm sure they would be happy to also make a presentation if there's an opportunity in the future about this tool. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to give some more detail about, we spoke a little bit about this, but some more detail about the input data that is needed to run the tool. So we're talking about things like, more general perspective, GDP, population, fuel and electricity prices, cost of different technologies, number of households, penetration rates of appliances and energy services. So in transport, vehicle fleet, mileage of different types of vehicles, the demand for freight transport. In industry, production of different products, tons of steel and cement, the specific energy consumption of the different production processes, the technology mixes that are used in industry. And yeah, in the transformation sector, similar things, with obviously important resource potential. We also looked into that. So obviously, how much wind, solar, hydro can there be in the country, and so on. So this is just a very brief and short list of input data. There is much more than that. And as you can see in the next slide, we can see the steps, the main steps in using the toolkit. So, and on the left-hand side, the first three steps are, in my view, the most time-consuming and to a large extent, the most important steps. And that's basically to define the scope of the analysis and to collect the input data. And the art of filling in data gaps, because obviously it's not always that we find all the data that we need to run our models or to run the tool. So there's a lot of data filling, and sometimes that can change importantly the results. So we have to be very careful with that. I would say those three first steps, or especially steps 2 and 3, are the ones that take more time. Once we have all the input data, we move to the sort of the middle of the slide, steps 4, 5, 6, where we basically feed all this information into the tool and resolve both the demand side, what I explained before with those types of equations I showed before, and then we resolve the supply side. Like I mentioned, when resolving the supply side, we have this interaction with the FlexTool for the power sector. And once we're happy with the results, we aggregate everything to determine the total primary energy supply. And so, and with all that, we move to this step 7 there, which is to consolidate all the information in full energy balance. So that's in the end one of the main outputs of the tool. If you're familiar with I'll show slide, I think full energy balance is basically the main output that contains all the information of almost everything. But because we have the full energy balance, we can also produce a full emissions balance. Obviously, the focus is CO2 emissions because we're talking about the energy sector. And the last step would be to look into costs, externalities, and investment needs based on the results of the analysis. And we do that for the different scenarios that I explained before. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is just an example to show an output of one of our analyses. This is the full energy balance. You cannot really see it there, but you can expand this energy balance. This is actually a pivot table in Excel that we can double click in each of these lines and it will expand to sectors, subsectors, technology. So you can have a very granular information of where energy is being consumed, what types of carriers are involved, and so on. And the same applies to emissions. So emissions, we can also produce that type of table there with all the detailed information of where emissions are happening in each part of the energy system. Some of the strengths and limitations of the tool, at the moment, we only deal with one country at a time. Obviously, if you're a country and you're interested, that's not an issue. That's more for us here than when we're doing regional analysis. We're trying to expand on that and do many countries at the same time. We work with 4 scenarios, like I mentioned before. If we need more scenarios, we need to run the tool more times. We do believe that this tool helps bring a lot of transparency to the process, given the level of detail and granularity that you have there, and also because all the assumptions and input data are open for anyone to see, if you're willing to disclose that. We think it's a very important thing that we produce full energy and emissions balances. Not all tools do that. All calculations, all the input data is openly available in Excel, so it's very easy to browse through the databases and see what's in there and judge for yourself whether something needs to be adjusted or not. It also allows an easy comparison of scenarios. If you have other institutions doing analysis, you can easily compare and pull the data and see how the different analysis from different institutions, for instance, compare. Next slide, please. The transformation sector, just to confirm, like I mentioned, is there. The level of granularity is a little less pronounced than the demand side, and is one, like I mentioned, that we always feel the need to add something new there, given the needs of each country and different analysis that we're doing. But we can do that, and that's not a problem. We also have in the tool the ability to do what we call the stock turnover model. So basically to look at how fleets of different things evolve over time. So say, if you want to introduce electric vehicles in the country and you want to understand what the sales of electric vehicles need to be for you to reach a certain share of electric vehicles in the fleet, given the existing fleet and give the turnover of the existing fleet. So the tool allows us to do that type of analysis. And we also developing little by little databases where we can have standard parameters and benchmarks of sort that we can use to make comparisons. As we do a specific country, say, wow, but how does my country compare to a different country or to a best available technology or a benchmark? So we are constantly collecting data as we do our analysis and building these databases, so then we can do these comparisons. Next slide, please. Some of the limitations of the tool does not help you fill in data. Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't help you. The tool does not fill in data gaps, obviously, right? So this is something that the analyst needs to do. The tool helps in the sense that because it's so granular, you can always work at a very detailed level, and I think that's easier if you have data gaps to fill. But filling data gaps is one step that is very relevant and relies a lot on the good judgment and experience of the analysts. And that's why it's important to work with countries, especially because sometimes it's the insider information that helps us fill in data gaps. The tool does not make projections for activity levels. So by that, a clear example, so if we're talking about the cement industry, and you need a projection of cement production from today until 2050, the tool will not help you do that. That is an input data. So every projection of activity level needs to come from outside. So there are other tools out there, macroeconomic tools and sector-specific tools that help people do that, but it's not the Remark Toolkit that will do that. Those are inputs to the analysis. Also, the tool does not take decisions on technology mixes. So this is different from other tools out there that normally rely on optimization, cost optimization. That's normally what they do, to take decisions for the analyst. In this case, no, all the decisions are taken by the analyst. So it's again the judgment of the analyst based on, for instance, costs, but other factors that will determine what the technology mix is as the scenario evolves. And I mentioned this before in the last bullet point. The tool does not perform dispatch analysis nor capacity expansion in the power sector, right? So for that, as I mentioned, we rely on other tools like Message, and now also the FlexTool helps us do that. And with that, I will hand over the floor to Maria, and she will continue the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rodrigo. A quick intervention, Maria, and for the next presenter, please be mindful of the time so that we conclude on time.
Perfect, yeah. So very quickly, so moving forward, we will now have a look at how the Remark tool can help us support the NDC process. Maybe, Rodrigo, if you can mute the mic, because I hear some interferences. Yeah, okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so just to emphasize once again, the REMAP analysis can support countries in the definition of the mitigation targets of the energy sector. The energy sector, including the end-use sectors on the one hand, that includes buildings, transport, and industry, and on the other hand, the energy supply analysis, which includes the power sector. Here, it is also important to emphasize that the interaction among the different sectors should be contemplated and considered for setting these targets. So, for example, how agricultural residues could be used by the power sector to generate electricity or to generate heat. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, here we have the 3 points that explain like the 3 main ways in which we see that the REMAP analysis can support countries in the NDC definition process. So the REMAP analysis could help countries understanding the implications of the emission reduction targets, also providing guidance in clear definition of the objectives, and also proposing additional targets. So now in the next slides, we will go and see 3 different examples that will illustrate these 3 points. But before that, just to, we would like to just mention like what would be the process for this. So as Rodrigo mentioned, first of all, we would engage with the country for the definition of the energy demand and supply scenarios, the reference ones and also the alternative ones. Then we would validate these results with the countries, which could come from the assumption that we defined together in the previous step. And then once we have the results, we would be ready to define or to revise some targets based on the results obtained, and also very important, some indicators that could help us monitoring the accomplishment of the targets defined. And also lastly, in the last step, we could also support countries on defining the actions that are needed in order to achieve these targets that have been defined. So now if we go to the next slide, you can see a first example that can illustrate us on how we can help countries understanding the targets. So here we have one example of a target that says that it aims to achieve an avoidance of 100 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year from the transport sector by 2030, through a 15% reduction in conventional transportation fuel use by 2030 and some promotion of energy efficiency in the transport sector. So in this case, this target was defined using a top-down approach. So how the Remark analysis would help us, it is to understand it from a bottom-up approach, as Rodrigo was mentioning. They would help us understand what this avoidance of 100 kilotons of CO2 equivalent per year means. So how that can be translated so that we can understand. So the Remark analysis would let us know which would be the annual improvement rate in fuel consumption per type of vehicle that would be needed to achieve in its scenario. Also, which are the shares of electric vehicles per vehicle that are needed to be achieved in order to keep on achieving all these reduction in emissions. Also, which targets in terms of sharing biofuel blending can be considered, and also some introduction of modal changes from private vehicles to public ones. So all these objectives in a more detailed scale would help us understand if really this reduction in emissions would be possible or not. So this shows us some examples of the fuel consumption that it has been set for some of the projects that we've been working in, and some of the annual improvement rate for each scenario. And if we go in the next slide, we can see some more graphs on the evolution of the car sales, for example, or buses sales, and how electric vehicles can increase depending on the scenario that we are. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that after analyzing all this more specific information, countries can reevaluate their NDC targets and adjust them if needed. So, for example, in this case, how this target could be adjusted, it would be after analyzing all these different objectives individually, we could see, well, maybe this 100 kilograms of CO2 per year, it is maybe a little bit ambitious, so we might decide to reduce this target. And then we can propose like which are the specific objectives in each of the different measures that are proposed. So this would help us really understanding which are the measures, and also help us monitoring this measure and really understanding if we've achieved these measures or not, these targets or not, sorry. If we go to the second example, here is supporting defining clear targets. So here we have improve in an example that is improve energy efficiency and conservation by at least 30% by 2030 in buildings against a 2011 or a past year baseline. So here's some recommendations that we would provide would be to define which is the measurement unit. So how are we going to account for this energy efficiency and conservation improvement? So it could be in terms of energy intensity, or it could be in terms of energy demand decrease in the same year in one scenario and another. So there are different possibilities, but this should be also, from our point of view, specified in the NDC target. Also very important to define the baseline. So it could be a past year baseline, or it could also be a business user scenario baseline. So that it depends also on the measurement unit that we decide. So the important thing is to have a clear idea of how we're going to measure the improvement, and if this target is achieved, and against which baseline we're going to measure it against. So if we go to the next slide, where we can see some other example on how the Remark analysis can help us understanding what this 30% of energy efficiency in buildings improvement means. And then we have there like a proposal of how this target could be expressed in a different way. So if we go to the next slide, just very quickly, and the first example, it is regarding the power sector. So it might also be the case that there is a target that is proposed that is to achieve 75% of the electricity generation from renewable sources. So after consulting the result that we have from our analysis, we might say, okay, this might be feasible. But then, as we were mentioning, since we have a very detailed analysis, we might realize that there are some other points that might be interesting for the country to highlight in their indices, and it might be interesting to set them there. So we could also propose additional measures that could be considered if appropriate. So then, just very briefly to wrap up, in the next slide, we would just like to mention that REMAP analysis. So we're developing the scenarios for the period from 2018 to 2050. So with a little bit more focus on 2030, but always having in mind the long-term goal that we want to achieve in 2050. So we make sure that the objectives that we propose for 2030 are already in line with those that we want to achieve in 2050, and that can lead the country to go in the direction that is wished. So with that, I leave the floor to Christy to finish the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. We're going to try to do this quite quickly. So to add up the case studies, we're going to give some examples of the energy decarbonization actions that we proposed in the REMAP analysis. So for each sector, we have defined energy decarbonization actions in what we call Actions Now table. The outcomes of the REMAP analysis then could be used as an input to either define new targets or to check, update the ones that you already have. So for example, for the building sector, we are introducing the reduction of energy consumption bills through implementation of energy efficiency indexes that have been planned by the countries. For example, we can model conditioners, more efficient refrigerators, also introduce energy efficiency in appliances. In terms of lighting, we're introducing technology shift. So we are changing from the conventional technologies to LED technology. Also, in terms of the distributed energy resources deployment, we are considering that a percentage of the electricity demand of the building sector is covered by solar PV rooftop systems. Also, continue with the building sector, we're introducing more renewables. So in case for the water heating needs, we're introducing solar water heating technologies. Also, we're considering heat pumps. And in the case of cooking, which is one of the main activities that we're introducing, replacement of to clean and efficient cookstoves. So for example, we are shifting from traditional biomass cooking stoves to electric stoves. That means that we are increasing the electrification in this activity. In terms of the transport sector, we'll also consider some action lines, for example, the reduction of the transport volume and congestion. So what we are doing with the tool is to set some modal shift from cars to buses or cars to bikes. Also, in terms of the fuel consumption, we are improving the rate of the fuel consumption for each type of vehicle. So we can define with the tool a time series of how the fuel consumption is evolving through time. And in terms of the penetration of the electric vehicles, since we have a list of the technologies, we are introducing electric motorcycles. We're also introducing electric cars, electric buses in the public fleet. And in terms of the cargo fleet, we're also introducing electric vehicles for heavy and light duty. And finally, in terms of the continue with the transport sector, we also have biofuels blendings. So the tools allows you to introduce either bioethanol, biodiesel, biojet, and modified also the percentage of the blending. So we are introducing different blendings per scenario. Continue with the industry sector. We also have some action lines in terms of reduction of the energy consumption. So you can define a time series of how the energy intensity is evolving through time, and we are decreasing that energy intensity between scenarios. And also we are including some renewables. So we're introducing the use of biomass products, also biodiesel as we considered in the transport sector. And also we're introducing solar thermal energy for industrial process heating. Now, this is almost the last slide. So for the World Energy Transition Outlook, we kind of defined several categories of how to group all these energy policies that contribute to the carbon emission abatement. So you can see here a list of these categories. The main ones are renewables, energy conservation and efficiency, and electrification. And yeah, so that would be the end of the presentation. If you find any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to contact us. Here are our email addresses. Ricardo Gorini is the team leader. Also, further information about the REMAP program is available in our website. And these slides and further material will be shared through a Dropbox folder. And yeah, from our side, from the REMAP team and for IRENA, we just want to thank the Caribbean Cooperative MRV Hub for the invitation to this webinar series. And to all the participants, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, Rodrigo, Maria, and Chrisley for that presentation, walking us through the tool, its capabilities, and also requirements. Now is the Q&A session. So I don't know if there's any further questions that we have from the audience. Please raise your hand and unmute your mic. You can turn on your video and raise your questions. In the meantime, we have one question for Rodrigo on his presentation from Charlie Heaps. I don't know, Rodrigo, if you had time to look at it. It's about availability of certain data.
Sorry, Ventura, I'm afraid I didn't see the question.
Okay, the question is about, you mentioned that you have developed or are developing databases of standardized technical parameters. Are those available to other organizations? And if so, can you tell us how to access them? This will be helpful to all of us working on these issues. I think you know Charlie already from Charlie Hibbs from Stockholm Environment Institute, so that was from him. Yeah.
No, these are not publicly available at the moment, so there's nowhere you can go on the web, on the internet, and find them. We are putting together these databases. I'm not sure how exactly we could share those. Maybe if Ricardo is still there, maybe he can also chime in. But we mostly use those for internal consumption and only when we're doing the analysis with specific countries.
Maybe I can briefly. So I think that it's probably a good idea to try to prepare some material around those databases, as we would like to be as transparent as possible in all these ranges of parameters. So I think that's a good idea. Let's discuss and consider how we could do that. And basically what Rodrigo was mentioning is that for each of those parameters related to energy service, we would like to have some ranges that we could apply, you know, and try to customize. So that could be a good starting point for discussions and filling the gaps. So good idea. So we'll consider that. Maybe we can produce a report. So back to you, Ventura.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thanks, Rodrigo, as well. I don't see any other questions that have been raised, and well, we do have some time, but I just wanted to see if there's any further questions. You still can type in or just raise your hands and raise a question. That will be faster. Okay, I don't see any further questions raised, but maybe a question from me from the. Okay, there's something that was on the chat. Okay, so Charlie has just responded. Charlie, I don't know if you want to unmute and give a direct feedback.
No, I just reacting, saying, yeah, it would be super helpful if, I think, people all around the world, if you can share that stuff, because I think sort of like a lot of the stuff that people struggle with when doing this modeling is, what sort of technical assumptions should they use? What is the average fuel economy of an existing car? How many light bulbs are there per household? Those kinds of, like, the nitty gritty stuff is the most difficult stuff. And even though it's that data is the least available data, so the more wisdom that you can share where you've already thought about those issues with other people, I think it would be super helpful to people, in the Caribbean and everywhere for that matter. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. So the question that I wanted to ask was maybe Ricardo, how many countries in the Caribbean other than Belize you would have covered through REMAP, where you might have done an exercise in any of the modes?
Yeah, no. So far we have done Belize. So in the Central America, actually was just Belize included. The Caribbean countries, we haven't the remaining ones we haven't really applied the tool yet. So we are happy to get your interest. As you know, in IRENA we need to be request to work with countries with, as you know, you are the members of IRENA, so we are happy to receive further requests as needed. But the case of Belize, of course, was a very interesting one. I think we could also work with other consultants. We gather a lot of nice expertise and information all together. And now the tool is filled with all this knowledge, and I think it's very, very helpful for the country, as we have been explaining here. So there is a lot of knowledge and numbers, database, organized information, so you can consider targets, having this backup of analysis, so specific policies and regulations that could be applied. So I think it's a very interesting case.
And this is the same with, I know that you're working with several of the Caribbean countries with the NDC revision process, but are there plans to apply REMAP in any of those countries that you are working with? IRENA in general is working with on the NDC process.
No, the other requests are not specific for this REMAP tool application. So there are different, I would say, requests. So different teams in IRENA are also working in this NDC assistance. So if countries would like to have a specific REMAP analysis, so that they should bring that to us, so we can, under the context of our partnership, we could work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And also maybe just to clarify, all the independent Caribbean countries, so we have 16 countries that we work with and the MRV hub covers 12 of them, which are the English-speaking countries. Are they all members of the members of IRENA, or is there any special requirement for that to request for the REMAP application if they are not a member?
This is something we can also discuss. It's not really a problem if it's not a full member. We can discuss that there's a specific division that's dealing with this, I would say, requests. So I would recommend to send us via email, and maybe we can also Ventura discuss that further together. Maybe we could consider a region analysis we are doing in Central Americas, as we explained before. So maybe this is a nice way forward. If we could consider, this regional analysis where we could go country by country, it's a possibility. If it's just a country, we're happy to discuss further. As I said, just send us an email and we will convene, we'll discuss with this division that's in charge of the country partnership. I think that's the best way forward.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and also the team for introduction of the REMAP tool. So this actually brings us to the end of this session and also the conclusion of the series of webinars where we introduced about the use of modeling and projections of greenhouse gases in the needs, what are the basic tools, what's needed to be done. And then we introduced three tools, which was Gasmo, Leap, and Prospects Plus. Then we had an introduction to tools for selection, a guidance tool. So you have the link here also on the chat, which Khalifa had kindly put there, that for selection of tools, these were referring to, of course, the initial three tools that we were considering, which are more economy-wide tools. And then based on the requests we got, we had two sessions that were focusing on sectoral tools. So looking at the AFALU sector, where FAO presented, and also today with for energy sector, where we had IRENA presented the REmap tool. So with this, we will conclude the introduction. So the idea was actually for the countries to get an idea of what are the various tools that are available, what capabilities they have. And I'd like to thank all of you who participated throughout the sessions. And also I'd like to thank our partners. So for this one, the MRV Hub partnered with the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center in Grenada, as well as SICRI, the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So I'd like to thank especially Gerald Lindo from SICRI, who had been, and his team for supporting us in co-organizing and delivering this webinar series. We are open to receiving requests for directly for us for the MRV Hub on the support that you would need, as well as if you want to contact any of those tools that was presented, so including IRENA, FAO, DTU partnership, new climate, and Stockholm Environmental Institute. If you have any questions for them, if you have any challenges in accessing some of the tools that were introduced, the tool or the guidance worksheet for selection of a tool based on your requirements that's produced by the MRV Hub Modeling and Projection team will be made available to you through our newsletter, as well as you could access it on the link on the GHGMI website by searching. And I'd like to thank all of you for participating on the series, and we look forward to joining again with another series, possibly focusing more on some of the selected tools and their applications. And this will be more developed based on the requirements. So thanks everyone, and I also like to thank the MRV Hub Secretariat, Hayden, Ayana, Quincy, and Khalifa for the support they provided in bringing this series, as well as my team, Donny and Benice, for helping me organize this webinar series. Thank you, and have a nice rest of the day. Back to you.